All right, here we go. Stocks by the numbers, welcome back. And I wanted to do a big update here today because obviously you guys can see it's a sea of red out there. Major indices down anywhere from 2 to almost 3% on the NASDAQ, leading the way on the sell-off, down over 500 points, 2.7%. Dow down almost 1,000 points. We may actually hit that mark. Still have a little over 20 minutes to go before the close, but it was a big tech day, of course, because tech, again, is selling off bigly. But we did have some positive news on some companies, and the rest are just dropping with the rest of the market. But Intel right now, INTC, this is what I mean when I spoke about the backup players. This is what they like to do. They like to take the brand name company. They like to take them out of the spotlight. They want to make it appear like there's nothing there. It's not worth your attention. No one can trust the stock. You shouldn't own it. And then when no one's looking, that's when deals are signed. And that's when, again, we had the rumor circulating here with Qualcomm potentially stepping in and buying some of the assets. But that didn't pan out. But we had news today. As you can see, Intel was up here almost 6% pre-market, up above $25 a share on the news that Nvidia and Broadcom testing their process for their AI chips, potentially boosting Intel's contract manufacturing amid profitability issues. So this is what I mean, right? Similar to what you saw with Rolls-Royce. Brand name company, they take it out of the spotlight, right? They beat it up for how long? Couple of years here, but even as of late, that's when they really dropped it down. And that's why I jumped on and I did that update when the stock was down here sub 20, and I mentioned it multiple times in the Discord. Again, Discord free for you guys to join if you want to come in. But I mentioned it multiple times that even in the 22, 24 range when we looked at it, and then down here in the high teens, I mentioned, in my opinion, there is value there. No matter how you want to slice and dice it, whether it's a buyout play, people acquiring assets, or the company would eventually get deals to come in and get itself back on its tracks. Because it's I don't want to say it's too big to fail, but at the same time, it's a brand name American company that has been around for quite some time. And I viewed it similar as a Ford situation back when the markets crashed in '08. Ford went down to $1, and of course, the rest is history. But Intel right now, obviously reversed down to about 22.5. But technically, this is good news, and I have a feeling that it came right down here. You can see, look, right down to that 20-day, and now it's going to potentially bounce tomorrow, whether markets are up, down, or sideways, maybe. It's probably setting up for another bounce here. Going to possibly trend down into a tight little wedge here, and then potentially pop out and run up before next earnings going out to the third week of April. But it looks like, again, it was in this rising wedge for quite some time, and now we dropped down, made our little W pattern, and now we're potentially getting ready to pop back up again and get back inside that range. And you can see, even if that happens immediately, bottom trend line of this initial wedge that I was looking at is about $30, high, very high 29s. So, in my opinion, my personal price target on Intel, probably about $30 a share. And again, that's going to be either way. It's probably going to take some time, but in my opinion, whether it's, again, other people paying them for whatever assets they might have or want, or contracts like this, all of a sudden they're getting tapped by all these other companies, and now they got deals coming in, and money's not an issue anymore, and we're back to business as usual. Basically, exactly what we saw with Rolls-Royce, who, by the way, hit new 52-week highs again today. That stock is now sitting over $10 a share, initially brought to you on this channel. $1.20. RSI on Intel on the daily, even with this big reversal drop, sitting here middle of the road at about 50. And you can see how it came right down to the 20-day on the other chart we were looking at, and it's sitting right here essentially at the mid-Bollinger Band on the daily as well. 2260, stocks at 2259. So in my opinion, I don't think it wants to go lower, at least immediately. But also at the same time, it did spike up here. And now if some of these rumors are getting dismissed, even with the news today, it may want to chunk down quickly and just tap up with that 20-day moving average there, slightly above 21, and then have a potential bounce and get back to that 24, 25 plus, because that's where it initially popped to on that news that came out pre-market, right? So that's why, again, in my opinion, off of this potential new influx of business coming in, you're looking mid to high 20s easily, in my opinion. But of course, it could potentially drop down before it goes up. The MACD did just cross to the downside here on the daily. And now, if we're really bleeding today, you can see again, Dow down now over 900 points. We still have a little less than 20 minutes to go. So if everyone continues to jump ship tomorrow, that's why I'm saying it might continue slightly down before it goes up. Mid Bollinger Band here on the weekly, 2207. So it could drop down potentially in about another 2.5%. RSI middle of the road on the weekly as well, slightly sub 49. MACD recently bounced off and didn't cross and continues upward. So in the long term, I still think there's bullish momentum here, believe it or not. In the short term, it could remain volatile, but again, based on that chart, in my eyes, should bounce back soon. Taiwan Semiconductor, TSM, big announcement, 100 plus billion, 165 billion investment coming into the United States, into Arizona to manufacture these semiconductors here domestically in the States. I believe they were talking about roughly like 40% of the business is being moved here to the States, and they're doing that to, number one, probably one hand washes the other, right? Because I know a lot of people have concerns about China potentially encroaching, we'll say, onto Taiwan, and they supply 90% of the global market for chips. So we're going to want to have that domestically here in the States as well, similar to what we spoke about with the LACs and the other lithium mines here domestically as well. The fact that we were going to get back to our own independent energy efficiency. And now we're with the tech market, and Trump is trying to bring the auto market here as well. So we're getting these updates pretty consistently, but TSM, pretty big announcement, and of course it's dropping with the rest of the market. You can see right now, TSM, Taiwan Semiconductor, $172, down about 8.5 points, almost 5% here on the day, which of course is a big chunk, but we were trending downward to begin with. And I drew out just a couple of trend lines here, going from the bottom of April 22nd, 24 to that big drop right there, August 5th, 24. That's our shorter term. I mean, technically it's a long term, right? It goes back to April of last year, but our shorter term support trend line, you can see right around 152, potentially the high 151s if they immediately drop it down, because in my eyes, this is actually very good news. In my eyes, this is very, very good news, not only for the United States, but for TSM as well. So if I was a long-term shareholder, I would actually view this as a positive, not necessarily a negative. But remember, if the company technically is writing a check for $100+ billion, they do have the potential to bring the stock down before it goes up, and it could be viewed as justified as well. But chances are it's not going to immediately drop down to this trend line in the 150s, so you're probably going to have a little bit of a recovery bounce here, and it may slowly just kind of bleed away from that 20-day moving average, right? And that might be a potential trader's trap, actually, in my opinion, because a lot of people may say, oh no, it's a brand name, it's going to bounce back and retest the moving average. Well, it might not, and it might consistently reject and continue to show weakness and try to suck you traders in, and then they pull it all the way down here to the low 150s, and you're like, oh crap, when it was 170, I bought 190s, so it could get bad quickly. It could get ugly very quickly if you're on the wrong side of the fence, especially if you're just going straight naked, buying calls, buying puts. But of course, that's where the highest reward is, so you got to risk it to get the biscuit. But also backing up here, you can see I went from these lows back here in November of 22, cutting up to those lows right around there, October of 23, that last sell-off that the markets had. And you can see that it's just a couple of bucks below that previous trend line. You're talking like the mid to higher 140s if it takes its time coming down. If they sell it off here going into April, and then potentially bounce it and give it some strength going into those earnings. Because chances are the numbers are going to be good, right? We see the revenue, the market share, as we said, 90% of the chips. So in my opinion, TSM is going to be just fine. Again, technically in the short term, it could pull back to some of those key levels I mentioned, but overall should be good. RSI now beaten up. I know a lot of traders out there, they look at the RSI, so you could actually have a potential retracement maybe back here. That's what I'm saying. You can get back maybe half of this big double red candle drop here, right? We went from about 195 down to almost 170. So we can reclaim and bounce on that oversold, excuse me, on the RSI being oversold, and you can get right back here to the 200-day potentially tomorrow. 182.68, so that could be maybe something to keep in mind. But I don't know. You have to be careful. You have to keep an eye on those futures at the open and decide whether you want to jump in or not, because after we have a day like today, sometimes the market immediately bounces back, right? And maybe we'll be green like 200-300 points across the board. Everything bounces back a little bit. But other times, you and I both know, people may feel this as the beginning of the end, the beginning of a correction or a recession announcement or something. So they want to, get out now. Better safe than sorry. Let me secure the profits I made over the last 6, 12 months, lock them in, and then I'll wait for the sell off and I'll sit in cash. I'll wait for the opportunities, right? So that's why it could continue tomorrow, but does look a little oversold there, obviously, 28 RSI on the daily, but here on the weekly, you can see it's sitting at about 40 and a third, so it can continue to drop down in the longer term time frame, which is why I think pulling back to this trend line here, about 152, I think that's going to happen. This down to 116 and a half, that would be pretty extreme, but we can see again, it did have a couple of pullbacks and a couple of tests throughout 2023. 2024 looking very strong, but remember, if we're connecting now all these tech companies together, right, and we have Nvidia pulling back, TSM's writing a big check, so they're selling off, and that's going to drag down Intel, and that's going to drag down AMD, right? And that's going to drag down SMCI, right? We know this, unfortunately. We've intertwined all of them, and we almost had to do it in that way because there's so much value, in my opinion, in the tech sector. So all of the companies now have become intertwined for the most part, at least those, again, in the AI sector and whatnot, the chips, the data centers, right? All these companies we can see now are commingling, if you will. But MACD still heading to the downside on the weekly. It's sitting here now below the 50-day moving average, 177.08. So that's why if we open slightly green pre-market, if futures are up right in the AM, you could see that little bounce back to this moving average, which could give it some bullish momentum to get back to what did we say, 182, the other moving average. But then chances are, in my eyes, you're going to see the rejection right about there, 182.60, I believe it was. And then it's going to come back down to the 150s, in my opinion. Who else? What did we say? Intel. I mean, SMCI, I know it usually goes in its own video, but I just want to show you guys here. You can see, of course, SMCI dropping down bigly here. It's down sub $36, down over 5.5 points on the day, almost a 14% drop for SMCI. But if we zoom in here, you can see, look at it approaching right at that trend line I have drawn out right there, which doesn't necessarily indicate a bounce, but it could pause there for a second, right? And you can see this trend line is this one right here. That's going from the bottoms June 26, 23, coming right there to those bottoms, third week of September 2023, cutting across to the bottom bodies of those candles right there, October 23, and that's cutting across right there, and you can see it pulled back right to that line. However, technically, again, after this big gap down with some of this nonsense that took place, you can see we are in this kind of upward channel taking place, right? So even if we potentially pull back and drop down here to maybe like 32-ish, it looks like, maybe 32.5, your chances are probably going to have a bounce and you're going to continue going up and up like that. In my opinion, I believe that's what the stock really should do. But again, I know they're connecting this one to Nvidia, and Nvidia, of course, has been dropping, so they might just go hand in hand. I was talking about Nvidia, but I wanted to look at SMCI. We'll look at Nvidia too real quick. But, okay, we got the mid-Bollinger Band on the weekly, 35.11. What was I looking at here? 32, about 32.5 potentially. That'd be like right there. No. And then let me come back. Come back on the daily, 50-day moving average 36.41. Stock kind of hanging out right there. MACD did just cross to the downside though recently. Chunk below that 200-day and now dropping down. But again, I don't know if we can really beat it up, because if we pull up Nvidia, you can see Nvidia's been trending straight downward. I drew out these trend lines, I don't remember when, but I mentioned in my opinion, you have to keep an eye on these support levels, and I was looking for a pullback to sub 100 at about 95.5. You can see the gap up right there going back in May, and then we had the stock split. And also there was a small gap back here, I believe, the end of January in 2024, down to about 63.5. So, in my opinion, we could potentially continue to step down here and get down to these sub $100 levels. which of course would make a lot of long-term investors happy because they might be able to reposition themselves or add to their positions on the dip. But Nvidia, in my opinion, tremendously overvalued, I still say, which is why I laid out these lines. And anytime someone would ask me about the stock, I mean, of course, it's just been up and up and up over the years. So I would always say that Nvidia is overvalued, and it could continue to grow. But I did always warn about situations like this. And I said, if you buy tech at the top, or if you buy these other smaller tech companies just because they're trending and everyone else is talking about it, if you're overpaying and paying near the highs, and then this happens, you are the one who is screwed and is left holding the bag. So that's why I never necessarily hate too much on companies like Nvidia or Palantir. I just feel that they get overinflated in value, and then if something like this happens, you're the one who gets screwed. So, that's why I would just always mention it, just to let you know, about those risks if we run into the volatilities or the sell-offs. But, yeah, in my opinion, Nvidia, what was that, 95.5 potentially. I think that's where it's going. And unfortunately, it's probably going to take SMCI with it, right? And a bunch of the other tech names as well. So you may see something where even if the RSIs, right, like we were just looking at some other style, TSM, I believe, on the daily, RSI down there at the 28 and change, just because it's technically sub the 30 benchmark and traders peg it as a buy now, doesn't necessarily mean it will have that bounce, right? We've seen stocks rally and get RSI well above the 70 benchmark. We've seen other stocks tank, RSIs drop down to 12, right? Hang out in the mid to low teens for a couple of days, couple of weeks before it finally has that U-turn recovery and gets back to 30, 40, 50. So I just want you to kind of be aware of what could potentially be coming. However, it sounds like tech is on the up and up. It might just be coming back down to earth right now, right? That might be all it is right now. Because technically, we are hearing about big money being reinvested here domestically in the tech sector, even more specifically than others. So technically, if we're looking at the markets here, these are our domestic markets here for the U.S., and if the reinvestment is coming in here and the dollar is going to potentially be stronger, in the long run, it's probably going to be good for market growth over the years, right? But even a lot of economists even said when they broke down the tariffs and some of the policies Trump wanted to implement and some of the cuts he wanted to make, all that nonsense, we kind of understood. Again, not to be cocky, I did. Hopefully you did as well, because you're starting to see it now in the short term. But we kind of understood that it was going to potentially get worse and get a little ugly when Trump got behind the wheel for the first 6-12 months, which is why I said markets went up and up and up under Biden when they really should have stagnated or dropped. And instead, we had markets rage. So even with Trump doing good things on paper for the country, in my opinion, if it strengthens the dollar, and all we focus on is the headline of the keyword tariffs, then we're going to potentially have a red year for year one under Trump. And it's not going to continue to just be up and up and up. However, everyone will be looking at the red numbers and saying, wow, these stocks were so high, now they're so low. But you and I both know if you have beast raging years, you also may have to have lull periods of 6 months, 12 months, maybe even 18 months. And then all of a sudden, right, everyone's beating earnings, everyone's on the up and up, all the economic data is growing, moving in the right direction, and then before you know it, we're back up even higher than where we are. And, the NASDAQ's up at 24, 25,000, the Dow's up here approaching 50K, and we're hitting new highs, right? So it's a lot of these are going to be a longer term play, and in my opinion, again, something like Nvidia, well, it's really overvalued in my opinion. So something like this, you got to be careful. SMCI, if you're playing some of these smaller tech companies, even like Intel and the other ones, I still say, in my opinion, you want the backup tech players. You don't want Nvidia right now, because I feel like all of this now AI demand and AI growth, it has to be already factored in. It's already priced in to the stock. You can't tell me it's a $3 trillion company doing $100 billion a year or whatever the heck they're up to right now, right? So that's why, in my eyes, you have to look at valuations, because even if something like SMCI will have a more red day than something like Nvidia, because it's closer to fair value, it will bounce back stronger and faster than Nvidia would, right? So in my opinion, you'll probably see SMCI back to like 40, 43, 45 before we see Nvidia have a big rebound, right? And we can possibly see something like SMCI get back to 45. We can see something like Intel rebound right back to 25, 26 tomorrow, because that's where it went this morning on the news. And we could potentially have Nvidia still seeing red while these others are rebounding and coming back green, slowly getting back to where they were. So that's why, in my opinion, I like to look at the numbers sometimes. But yeah, I just wanted to do like a quick tech recap. And again, I listened to Trump's speech with the TSM CEO, so I heard all that stuff. So I wanted to jump on. I wanted to give you guys a quick little update about some of the investments coming into the States and what some of these companies are doing. But that's pretty much it. I'll end it there. So once again, Stocks by the Numbers, I want to thank you for stopping by. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please drop it down in the comments section. I'm usually pretty quick to reply. Oh, wait, I know I forgot to bring it up, but I'm bringing everyone back here. Of course, AMD, I know this was one that we spoke about. And of course, AMD dropping with the rest of the market. You can see new 52-week lows here at 97.09. Stock bouncing back to about 98.25. However, we were pointing out this tight little downward channel. And you can see that we almost broke out, and we recently rejected, started dropping with the rest of tech over the last 2 weeks roughly. We rejected off that fib. We came down, but we're technically still inside that downward channel, right? And this is what we spoke about. We spoke about the fact that we could lull it out for a little bit down to the 90s maybe, and then start to rally it back up here. But again, in my opinion, when I spoke about this, these are longer term plays, right? SMCI, like, we know it's volatile, and you could buy it now at 35 and you can wake up in 3 days and it's at 55, right? We know the way it can swing, so you could make yourself a quick profit. But I still say, in my opinion, something like an SMCI long-term price target, I think 200 plus, if they get past the DOJ investigation and all the other nonsense. Something like AMD, same thing. Is it going to remain volatile over the next 3 to 6 months? Yes, most likely. Yes, I'm going to tell you that much right now. But as we look longer term, telling me this stock can't rebound to even 170, 200 plus, in my opinion, I think it goes to 200 plus as well. I do. So that's why, again, I know sometimes in the short term it does suck and it does hurt, especially on a day like today. But as we say, with these long-term investments, you have to deal with the short-term volatility to get that long-term growth. And you saw it time and time again, with all due respect, looking at companies like Rolls-Royce over the months and the years, stocks like SoundHound, stocks like Fubo. Again, everyone, when SoundHound was selling off, going sub $2, everybody wanted an answer. Everyone was upset. Then before you know it, the stock's breaking out at $10, $12, $25 a share, new 52-week highs. So now if we jump in the time machine, are you going to beat yourself up because you bought the stock and it went down? Or are you going to kick some sense into yourself and try to accumulate shares and build a position before it takes off in the long term? Because in my opinion, again, not to be cocky, that seems like to be the easiest strategy here when we're talking about investments. But that's it. I'll end it there. Like the video, thumbs up, share the video, all that stuff for the algorithm. I understand markets are rocky. They're volatile. Today may have hurt a lot of people. So I do hope everyone's okay. But, I just hope everyone isn't too exposed. And, you're playing it smartly. But, yeah, that's it. So thanks for your time. Have a good day.